Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a regular meeting of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Tuesday, August 27th, 2024. The first item on the agenda is roll call. Susan Axelrod. Here. Joe Murphy. Here. Robin Pothy is absent. Liz Karp. Here. Peter DiStefano. Here. Caper Wilson. Here. And Maria Mack is here. Our next agenda item consists of the consent agenda, which is approval of minutes from July 23rd, 2024, Planning Board regular session, and July 31st, 2024, Planning Board special regular session, as well as the report of the administrative officer. If there are no changes or corrections, would someone like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make that motion. I'll second.
Motion from Susan, second from Liz. Oh, there were at least two people speaking simultaneously. Was it you, Caper?
Yes.
Motion from Caper, second from Liz. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Motion carries. Our next agenda item is a public hearing, major subdivision, combined conceptual master plan and preliminary plan, the lots on Columbia. Is there anyone representing the applicant?
Hello, Chair Mack, members of the board. Good evening. James Callahan on behalf of Scott Hallberg. Scott's here tonight. Just an update on our previous presentation last month. We did contact URI, Kate Hardesty Venturini, I believe. Kate Venturini Hardesty from URI, the invasive. She provided us the Rhode Island Certified Invasive Manager list provided by URI, so we are contacting them. It's apparently a 3-year plan for their invasive species management plans, as Chair Mack knows. I've learned that today, part of the training program graduate. So we are going to provide that. Also, we need to provide more engineering for Mr. Conboy to address all the issues raised at last meeting. So at this point, I'd like to ask for a continuance to a next meeting and keep the public hearing open.
Very good. Jay, Jamie, do we have a date for our next regular meeting?
Just, Madam Chair, as you're looking at the dates for the continuance, I did pass out to the applicant as well as the planning board members a letter dated August 18, 2024 from a group of, it appears to be abutters to this project. So again, I just want noted that that has been put into the record of the public hearing.
Very good. Thank you, Jamie.
Maria, your next regular meeting is September 24th, Tuesday the 24th.
Thank you. Would someone like to make a motion to continue this item until September 24th, 2024?
So moved.
Motion from Joe. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Caper. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Our next agenda item is a public hearing, major land development, combined conceptual master and preliminary plan with Unified Development Review, McCrory.
Hello again, Chair Mack. James Callahan on behalf of the McCrorys, Callahan and Callahan, 3 Brown Street in Wickford. So we're here again tonight on the combined master and preliminary plans for 507 to 509 High Street. As you know, we've been before you on a couple of occasions, actually a couple of occasions of this project and numerous occasions on past projects, past presentations. We have addressed a number of issues with staff in the past 2 months or 3 months since May 30th. Those included the RIDEM permit, which was revised, submitted, and received back from DEM. That should be in your packet as of July 8th, 2024. We also addressed parking issues with Mr. Conboy at length to add a turnaround area so there's no backing out into High Street. There's a condition on the proposed plans or decisions, and that's number 14. And we also understand that, I'm sorry, not number 14, number 13. And we also addressed the condition proposed as number 14 regarding the curb cut modifications, and we have no issue with that as well. So Tom Principe from Principe Engineering is here tonight, as well as Karen Beck, as well as Glenn and Gretel McCory, and me, obviously. So we're happy to address any concerns you may have going forward.
Thank you. Questions from board members? And actually, before we get to questions, it might be helpful if you could have your engineer go over the changes with regard to the DOT entrance, the curb cut, the sidewalk, or the crossing walk, and anything else relevant to that.
And just as a preface of that, we understand that the curb cut will be reduced from 24 feet to 20 feet at the request of staff, which I have no issue with. All other changes to the plans are all internal to the site. So we received a applicability permit from RIDOT, and that still is in effect. We don't think that changes anything in terms of the interior of the space. The driveway remains 24 feet in width within the site. So with that, as a preface, I think Mr. Principe can answer any questions on the technical level.
Thank you.
Good morning. Actually, good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. Tom Principe, registered professional engineer, Principe Engineering Company. Office is in Tiverton and Narragansett. So again, thank you for our council to preface a little bit more about that Department of Transportation permit. So just to point that out, Madam Chair, members of the board, back in, let's see, March of 24, again, as you know, this project has changed several times since March of 24. At that time, we submitted a letter to the Department of Transportation for an applicability on the proposed 5 units that we were proposing in the rear portion of this property. And then when we got a letter back, they reviewed the project at that time. Obviously, they do not have a current set of plans of today's date, but back in March, when we had the conceptual plans, they were reviewing it for an applicability on the PAP permit, and they issued something back in April 19th of 24, stating that at the current time they reviewed the plans, we didn't need a physical alteration permit. Again, that was at that time. We understand with the conditions today and where we are today, we do have revised plans, we have new parking, and we are going to make some modifications to that entrance as well. We went out there and studied it in detail, and having a 20-foot entrance, it will not be an issue. It's something that we do have to revise on our plans and modify as part of the conditions. But again, that existing crosswalk will not be altered. It will stay in the same location. And there will be a couple of pieces of curbing that will have to be altered. But again, that's going to be on a detailed engineering plan set once we, again, have the final feedback from the board. And then we'll submit that to the Department of Transportation for a physical alteration permit, because then that will trigger an actual PAP. There's also a utility permit that we'll need to get. That's usually done after by the contractor posting a bond and providing his insurance, because we have our new water line and our new sewer line that comes into High Street as well. Happy to answer any other questions that the board might have at this time.
Questions? Liz? Turn your mic on.
I know back in March, we did see some architectural renderings of the exterior of the new building. Have they been updated at all?
I'll have to leave that up to our client. No, those are the same plans according to our client.
Okay. Will they be updated?
No, wait, actually, why don't you come up? So you know for the record.
My name's Glenn McCrory, building owner. There's nothing to update on the plans. Mainly the stuff that was changed was all the parking related. The entrance is the same. So as far as the renderings were concerned, the buildings all look the same. The parking area will all look the same. It just, yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
just to clarify the point for that, again, a lot of the changes were, again, engineering related, grading, drainage, DEM, meeting with the town's engineer and planner on a lot of detail-oriented stuff for the interior design of this project. So, yep.
Susan?
Are you done, Liz? Hi.
Hi.
I see a few things have changed. The parking configuration as you first pull into the driveway. Can you tell me how the landscape plan has changed, or what your new landscape plans are now that things have been moved around on the site?
Sure. With the landscape questions, I'd give it to Karen Beck, the registered landscape architect, for those landscape-specific questions, if that's
Yep.
okay. Karen, could you just talk? Do you have just the landscape?
We did revise the landscape plan when we...
Just restate your name for the
Oh,
record, please.
Karen Beck, registered
Thanks.
landscape architect, Principe Company. We did revise the landscape plan in coordination with town planner and the relocation of the, we have not resubmitted the landscape plan. This is the original plan that was approved as part of the DEM, but basically it's the same plant materials. You'll notice that there's one tree off the northwest corner of the proposed building, which is where the turnaround is going to be located, so that tree will have to be relocated to some other location. It's not existing, it's proposed, so that's pretty easy to do. But the species, quantities, all that stuff like that is basically the same.
Okay, thank you. So that area that you're pointing to is now permeable pavers?
Yes,
Where that was originally, I think, lawn?
lawn, correct.
And so that is intended now to be used as a parking turnaround space as opposed to
Right, well,
outdoor living space?
no, it can be outdoor living space, and 99% of the time, that's exactly what it'll be used for. There was concern by the staff in the town about having an additional area to potentially turn around if it was necessary to make sure that they didn't back out onto High Street. We don't honestly think it'll be used that way, but it's there, so it can be a patio and used for outdoor recreation, or someone could back with a car into that particular area if they really needed to, which again, we don't think is necessary.
Okay, thank you. So this will be the permeable pavers that support sod, or will this be like a patio
No,
surface?
It's a patio surface, yeah.
Okay.
Because we wanted to make it obvious that somebody could back up into the area if needed to. If it looked like lawn, it may not necessarily be something that somebody would assume that they could back up into.
Okay. So the area just as I pull into the driveway on the left, that grassy area that wasn't there, I think, originally, are you planting things in that space in the very northwest corner of the
Yes,
site?
yeah, there was a planting area in that particular, even though the parking spaces were parallel parking spaces instead of perpendicular, but we're going to be planting that area, and it will definitely be a clearly delineated planted area so that people will not pull out onto the crosswalk or anything like that.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's all I have for landscape questions for you. Thank you. But I do have a question for staff. Does this area that's now a parking turnaround space change the required open space requirements for this project? Does that impact what we had listed as open space or recreation space? Does it matter?
Bear with us for a moment. And just, Madam Chair, as we're going through documents, just a point of clarity. The turnaround area is either a turnaround area, but from my perspective, it's not a patio. For a professional to tell you it's needed for turnaround, for the town engineer to support a turnaround, and then for someone to come up and testify before you that it may be used as a patio, I think is a direct conflict of the intention of putting it there. And would be a direct conflict between a pedestrian use of an area that is dedicated to turn a car around so it doesn't have to back on the high street. So I'm a little confused by the professional testimony submitted. You had a PE say it's a turnaround area, you had a landscape architect say it's now a patio. So,
Yeah, so
I was going to follow up and ask if you were using something like Unilock-type pavers.
Absolutely, and again, I can understand the dichotomy
Not
with that.
necessarily that brand, but...
Yeah, I can understand the dichotomy with that, but again, yes, is it used as a turnaround? Is it needed? No. In my professional engineering experience, again, as a professional engineer for this project, we still firmly believe it's not needed, but again, to try to satisfy, the town, we did install that, and exactly what Karen said, it absolutely can be used for H20 loading for cars to back up or pedestrian use. So I get both sides. Are they gonna have a patio, lawn, and chairs? Again, we're more than amenable to make that a condition, that there can't be any permanent, applications for pedestrian use, because could be used for a turning radius to back up. But again, it's still our position that we don't feel that that is needed. We're just adding it on because we do have some space for it, and it's porous, so it doesn't increase any of the runoffs rates. So again, we could talk about that all night long about, is it a patio, is it a parking? But that's where we are, and that was the latest revision just to satisfy that requirement. But we're okay and amenable to make a restriction on it, so we don't have any sort of permanent pedestrians using it for recreation, if that makes sense.
Jamie?
I think the key is permanent or temporary. It's either turnaround or it's patio. To me, it's not a furniture place. It's not a pedestrian place.
Liz?
To call it both, I think it's a safety issue. What are you going to do, have kids playing there or people having lunch outside? And then, oh, God, get out of the way, there's a car turning around. It can't be both.
Understood. Yeah, and again, we're more than amenable to making a restriction. That's fine.
Mark, comments from DPS?
Yes, I strictly asked for that to be a turnaround only, and that be the only use for that turnaround, that not be occupied by cars or anything else. The reason being is because if all these parking areas are filled, there's not an easy way to turn around and to go out straight out of the parking lot. You'd have to, on some occasions, back out. And we looked at that, and that's a dangerous situation, backing out into the road. There's limited sight distance because of the obstruction of the building.
So again, our client just said he's amenable to putting it on the lease as well, to make it a restriction, and we could put signage up. So we're amenable to that as a condition. That's fine.
I'm sorry, a sign to tell you not to park on it, or to not set up your patio furniture on it, or what kind of restriction are you implying that will be put on that space?
No parking, we'll do whatever we can do.
You want to work with maybe the solicitor on that, and just make it a condition, and we can work with the terminology with the solicitor?
And we want no backing up onto High Street, a sign for that as well, as noted in the staff report. And just for the boards, I know it's obvious, it's practical, but if you park facing the north, right there, and you are going to leave that site, you are not going to turn your car that way and back out onto High Street. That's insanity. You're just going to turn your car to the left and back out towards the east and then go west. So I know it's a concern. We've made the change. The permeable pavers are there. If someone sets up a tent for a block party, we'll ask them to take it down. But that's not going to happen. It's not going to be every day. It's not going to be any day. There's going to be no picnic tables, no chairs. It's going to be open space. It's going to be open for the people parked there, and it doesn't affect the open space because it's more than required as is. So I know it's been a concern, but no one is going to back on the High Street. That is insane. I'm sorry.
It sounds as though this can be mitigated with the approval of DPS and planning.
Yes, yes, it can.
Other questions, comments from board members? I had a question on the revised plans with regard to landscaping with that northwestern corner that Susan mentioned. This is what we have, and it's microscopic. Could you just give us a little bit of detail what the plans are for that particular corner?
Again, if you look at what was previously submitted to the town and approved by DEM as far as the parking spaces. And I have, yeah, so the perpendicular parking spaces, that's an old plan. So that's not current, and that's not what was submitted to the town or to DEM. The June plans show the perpendicular parking spaces. They have curb stops to prevent them from going too close to the stream. We're showing a small snow storage area immediately adjacent to it because there was a concern about snow storage on the property. And there is a proposal for 3 bayberries and 1 multi-stem river birch. And that will definitely prevent anybody from accessing through that area.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Jamie?
Madam Chair, just for clarity, do any of your detail sheets show the needed modifications to the curbing or sidewalk that you mentioned?
Again, at this point, we were trying
Just
to...
restate your name,
Oh, so-
please. just
Yeah,
for the
sure,
record.
sure. Tom Principe, Principe Engineering. Again, that's going to be a condition for the construction set and the next phase to get all the details for the actual curb opening of 20 feet. Now that we know the town's amenable from going to a 24, which we show on our plans, to a 20. So again, those will be part of the conditions and the next round of engineering plans, because then we would have to get that physical alteration permit from the Department of Transportation, because that would be within their jurisdiction.
What's the time frame that you're talking about here? Because this is combined master plan and preliminary, so
Sure.
are you saying it would be within this time frame or at final?
For the DOT permit? So, I'm sorry, what, could you explain that?
Any update, what your reference to any updating with your engineering or drawings that are up to date? When would that happen?
Oh, well, that would
This is a
happen.
combined review.
Correct, correct. Yeah, so that would happen basically for final, because it's the final construction set.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm sorry to ask again. I just saw the landscape plan that showed that there was a tree where the turnaround is now. Are you proposing so now it's gone. Are you proposing some alternate planning? Like, is there another tree going in or putting a bunch of shrubs? Like, how are we going to maybe accommodate that tree that's not going to be planted there?
I'm just going to move the tree someplace else. It's a proposed tree. It's not an existing tree.
Okay,
So the net number of trees remains the same.
That is correct.
okay. Thank you.
Jamie, staff, any other thoughts with regard to the timing of the information that will be forthcoming?
The only thing I will say, and I have slides to back it up, is that typically when someone proposes a curb cut, they also show the modifications to all infrastructure, like the need to move and reset curbing, the need to relocate or retrofit a sidewalk. They typically would clearly show what existed, which is only a 15-foot wide curb cut, not a 24-foot wide curb cut. Again, that we're used to seeing that detail at this stage, not even any hint that that needed to be done until staff brought it up.
So given that fact, is this something that you feel the applicant could provide, and can you provide this to staff prior to final?
We have included a revised motion, and I can read that. Their counsel is aware of it, that the applicant shall submit revised plans to Public Service Director and Town Engineer detailing curb cut modifications, including sidewalk replacement modifications, curbing replacement modifications, signage for crosswalk, and any necessary modifications to the crosswalk. Plans shall include all necessary details for proposed work associated with the installation of the new curb cut, In coordination with RIDOT, the planning board will allow the driveway width to be reduced to 20 feet from the proposed 24 feet. The applicant should also revise the landscape plans to add an additional landscape and hardscape feature to block vehicular traffic from exiting the crosswalk/sidewalk area. Revised plans shall be submitted to RIDOT for review and approval. So again, there's kind of a two-step. They come back to planning board staff, being the planning department and the engineering department, for review, and then they go to RIDOT.
And before we get too far into revisions to the motion, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to this item?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, Tom Pritzby again. Did you need any additional clarification regarding the Department of Transportation permit? I feel like I just want to explain to the board, just to
Sure.
clarify the
Sure.
applicability letter, just so you understand, again, and it's knowledge for the crowd, it's knowledge for everybody else. When we submitted the applicability letter, they look at the existing curb cut, this granite curb and concrete sidewalk there. That's probably the last 10 years. It's not old, it's not new. They look at the project as a whole, and in their letter, they specifically said that the existing curb cut, again, I can read it verbatim, but let's see. All existing conditions will remain, and the site will utilize the existing curb cut for driveway access. So that came right from the Department of Transportation on their letter. I believe this is submitted for the record, the applicability. I believe the board has it, and it's just point of clarification. We're willing to work with the town. We have been from day one. I just want the board to understand where we came from, and that, again, we would working with the town as well on their requirements. So it's kind of this dichotomy of working with both state and town. And at the beginning, we got the Department of Transportation that said, you can use your existing curb cut. I understand it's 14 feet wide. I agree, we probably should widen it. I think it's a safety issue. I think recognizing 24 is not necessary, we can make 20. So with that said, having 20 feet, absolutely. So now we have to just put a plan together, and there's two pieces of curbing that have to come out and re-pour the sidewalk, but we also have sewer and water. We're gonna be ripping up that sidewalk anyway with the excavation and the construction. So it's actually not a huge deal. We're not worried about DOT having an issue with it. The crosswalk stays the same, and nothing else gets altered. So again, just from our point of view, I just want the board just to understand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additions to that from Mark or Jamie? Obviously, they need to get their PAP. They need to comply with the conditions in any kind of approval. Jamie or
Yeah.
Jay?
I mean, I could go into more detail if the planning board members have questions of what the curb cut actually looks like and what they were proposing. And then what they were proposing, modifications need to be made, yet they weren't reflected on the plans, and I'll leave it at that.
I think probably the board would be primarily concerned with what the end product will be and what the final.
Was also one recommendation from RIDOT to provide a paved apron on the back side of the sidewalk to protect that infrastructure from damage.
I'll ask again if there is anyone who wishes to speak to this item. If none, would someone like to make a motion to close the public hearing? I'll make that motion. We have a motion from Peter. Do we have a second? Second from Susan. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. So we have received this evening revisions to a motion, but this actually begins on page 6. Of the staff comments, and
So,
at the
Madam Chair.
bottom of the page, and there is a typo under findings of fact E, which should say High Street, not Green Street.
And again, that that typo has been corrected on staff's copy.
Well,
E
Well-
didn't print out on,
yeah, what you've
The
given us
revisions given to you.
begins partway through,
Yeah.
just so everyone is clear on that.
and again, the changes to the motion that was sent to you last week entails revisions to 9
Nine.
regarding the submission of architectural plans for the dumpster enclosure and gate to match the architecture of the buildings, and then also the inclusion of a 14 regarding the curb cut modifications and RIDOT permitting.
And Jamie, there's nothing in this, in these revisions of conditions that alludes to the apron that you mentioned? Is that something you feel?
That was in RIDOT's correspondence. I'm sure they'll require it. And again, we'll be looking for that when the resubmittal's sent to Public Service and the AO.
Has the applicant had an opportunity to view this revised motion?
We did, and we have no objections to 9 or 14, as well as the other conditions as proposed.
Thank you. Yes.
As they've moved around the parking and that apron and stuff inside the site, is number 13, which acknowledges that cars potentially can't turn around, is that still a note that we should make with this project, or has that concern that we have about turning radius and backing onto High Street been adequately addressed, so that's not part of this anymore?
The applicant never provided the town with appropriate turning radiuses associated with ITE manual or ASHTO. So we still stand by that comment.
So Jamie, on number 13, might it be prudent to change discourage cars to prevent cars?
Signage can't prevent.
Signage
can
shall be
only-
added to the property to prevent cars from backing out onto High
Yeah,
Street. Is that better,
we,
stronger,
yeah, but
Peter?
we can't, a sign can't prevent someone from doing something. It can only advise someone not to do something.
Just sounds weaker, but if staff and legal is fine with that language.
Council said they're comfortable with the existing language.
Okay. Anything else from anyone? Joe?
Conditions of approval, number 3, states that the LMI housing shall be integrated throughout the development. Condition of approval 4 says that as part of the final submission, the applicant will indicate which specific lots and units will be the LMI housing. In our previous discussion with the applicant in previous meetings, I think we had asked for, and they had indicated that one of the LMI units would be in the new building, one of the LMI units would be in the existing building. I would like to see the language in the conditions of approval strengthened to indicate that, so there's no confusion later on what we mean by integrated. And also that in each of those cases, both for the one going in the new building and one in the existing building, that they be equal to the average square foot of the units within that building. So the one in the new building should be equal to the average square foot and the average number of bedrooms in the new building. The one that's in the existing unit should be equal to the average square foot and the average number of bedrooms of units in that building.
Madam Chair, if I may, I understand Mr. Murphy's comment. Item number 3 deals with compatible scale for the units, and it is staff's understanding, and that's where we're comfortable with the language that one unit is going in a new building and one unit is going in an existing building, and they have to be compatible scale to the existing units. So you can't pick a studio, you can't decide to do a studio in the new building and a studio in the existing building and call them compatible.
I agree with you, and that's the language within the state regulation. although compatible leaves the door open, and in matter of fact, in previous projects, we have approved compatible being less than, maybe 5% or 10% less than the market rate units. So for clarity, I'd like to, I would like to not leave open for interpretation what integrated and compatible means, exactly what this board has discussed and what they have agreed to do, which would be one in the new unit, one in the existing unit, and be this average size and the same number of buildings as the average in that building.
It seems as though that language could be added to condition number 4, because compatibility and location are 2 different issues.
We can add language to that effect.
Thank you.
Anything else from anyone? And DPS is fine with the language contained in this motion?
Yes.
Very good.
And just for Mr. Murphy's, to his point, the units in the existing building are all similar in size and scale, and the new units in the proposed building are all similar in size and scale, almost identical.
So I'll make it easy for you.
Yes. So we have a revised motion. The motion actually begins under staff comments on page 6, and then we have revisions that have been discussed. Would someone like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion. I'll make an attempt at making that motion. Okay. The South Kingstown Planning Board hereby grants combined conceptual master plan and preliminary plan approval for the McCrory Major Land Development application for one new building containing 5 residential units located at 507 and 509 High Street, South Kingston, Rhode Island, Plat 48-3, Lot 150, Glenn and Gretel McCrory, owner applicant. The approval is based upon a plan set entitled Conceptual Master Plan, Preliminary Plan Submission, High Street Multi-Household Land Development Project, prepared by Persine Company, Inc., sheets 1 to 7, revised 6/6/2024. The architectural plans prepared by Cortison Design Architecture, sheets A01, A02, A1.0, A1.1, A2.0, A2.1, R1.0 through R1.7, March 22nd, 2024. The approval is based on the following findings of fact and conditions of approval. Findings of fact A through G. Nope. A through I. Conditions of approval as modified and presented to us tonight, which is 1 through 15, with item number 4 being modified based on our discussions.
Madam Chair, just for clarity, Joe in our motion referenced the revision dates of June. I just want to make a correction that we will double check the revision dates of the plan submitted to us, that the motion is for the 90-degree angled parking as well as the additional turnaround. So that's the latest set. And we only got cut sheets for those versus a full set of plans. So I just want to make it clear that your motion is to approve the 90-degree parking and the revised turnaround area.
Yes, and modified condition approval for.
And wanted to be sure that you included the requested relief as well as the variances from the zoning ordinance under Unified Development Review. Thank you, Joe. Do we have a second? Second from Peter. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Our next agenda item is public hearing on a major land development, change to a previously approved development plan with Unified Development Review, South Shore Village and Country Club. Is there anyone representing the applicant?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. Attorney Matthew Leander on behalf of the applicant Envine LLC. Madam Chair, it's my recollection that the public hearing was closed at the last proceeding, and this was pending draft motion and decision for this evening. So I have nothing additional to add by way of comment or testimony, unless there's another area that we need to address.
Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, you do have a staff memo. I'll go to the recommended conditions of approval, which are 4. Item number 1 is that all prior conditions associated with the previously approved approvals shall remain in full force and effect. Specifically, condition number 6 shall remain in full effect with the exception that public play shall be allowed. 2, the golf course shall be prohibited from conducting business that allow the general public to utilize the property facilities for any other purpose other than golf, i.e. actively playing golf and or utilizing practice facilities. 3, the applicant shall submit a signage plan, directional, to the administrative officer for final review and approval in consultation with public service and the South Kingstown Police Chief. All directional signage shall direct all exiting visitors to Gravelly Hill Road, Shannock Road, and Route 1. 4, all promotional materials, i.e. webpage, email, digital media, and golf course literature shall direct visitors to gain access from the facility from Route 1.
You mean 2, right?
Route 1.
To the facility. From
To
Route
and
1.
from. Gaining access, and then the above one. 3 deals with exiting.
Comments?
We can clarify to and from.
Susan?
For all the testimony that we've heard and looking at the approval for this project from the 1990s, somebody, hey Joe, can you turn your mic off?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I remain concerned about the impact of potential traffic to the village at Warden's Pond and other neighborhoods in the area. And I'm going to maybe assume that's why this golf course was limited to only private use back when it was approved in the original. And I'd like to understand if we're making any effort here to control the traffic, aside from just telling people not to drive that way. And then I looked at, so you'll have to school me here on the subdivision approval process, which declares that it needs to promote the protection of the existing natural and built environment and the mitigation of all significant negative impacts of any proposed development on the existing environment, and whether or not that applies to this change of use, because we are potentially setting up the neighbors for additional traffic in approving this change. And I don't know if that requirement for subdivision applies to this, but there may be an impact to that neighborhood from this traffic that we aren't really addressing.
Before council goes on the legal side, with regards to traffic, you had testimony from a professional engineer who did a traffic analysis that those impacts would be minimal. Level of service would not be affected by any additional travel to and from the facility as it relates to the change of use from private to public. So it's not like level of service A at intersections that goes to a B, C, or D.
Yes, and I appreciate that for Shannock Road or for Route 1. But when it was originally approved, it was the residents who live here and the residents who lived in the project next door. So there wouldn't be people driving down from other parts of the state or in from out of state to use the facility. They would all be essentially people who live or are contained within that general neighborhood, maybe walking there or taking their golf carts. But now we're asking people who don't live there to drive to the site. And so it's not the traffic on Route 1 that to me is concerning, it's the traffic through the other neighborhoods, the private roads to the north. That would be my concern.
Yeah, I'll defer the utilization on private roads to council.
So I think if you were to look at this from the perspective of why the condition was put in place way back when it was approved, I think that's a fair observation. And it probably was the reason that they put a restriction like that, was a thought that it might mitigate any traffic concerns. I think the big issue with the application that's before you now is that a public golf course without alcohol is now a permitted use. So, whereas back then, they were required to come and get certain approvals, and there could be conditions put on the use because they were getting something that not everybody else was entitled to. Now, because it's a permitted use, I think that undercuts that change of circumstances undercuts that concern. Doesn't entirely eliminate it. I think to the extent that there are reasonable conditions that you can put on to mitigate that, this is certainly an opportunity to do so. But, considering that, for instance, the parcel directly next door could be opened up as a public golf course, provided there's no alcohol, by right, and there would be no opportunity to tell that use that they couldn't go there, and probably less of an opportunity to impose any conditions to mitigate the impacts. I think what you're looking at here is really, are there reasonable conditions you can put on to mitigate those concerns? But I don't think that you could deny it based on that.
Thank you. I understand that the lot next door could get a golf course, but I don't think that they would be able to make an access road to that golf course through that private road neighborhood, where this golf course does have access through a private neighborhood, where theoretically a new one would not. And would that not be something to mitigate the traffic in a neighborhood, to just not put a road there, where now there is one here?
So, whenever you're creating a roadway, that's always a concern of where it connects into the other roads in the area. You're right that the neighboring parcel wouldn't connect directly where this parcel connects, but it would connect somewhere, and based on the traffic patterns, they may end up going on other private roads that are further out from that parcel. I think that just comes back to there's a limited amount of what you can do to control traffic as you radiate away from the parcel. One thing you can do is to control the use, but when the council has decided, and it's not a planning board decision, that it's a permitted use, that significantly limits that avenue of mitigating traffic. What you're left with beyond that is really traffic mitigation measures that you can require them to impose on site. There's not much you can do to require them to impose off-site traffic measures that are further from the location of the use. It's not that it's not a concern, but it's just harder to trace, and it's less of a nexus between the use and the impacts the further you get away from the site.
Peter, question. As it relates to the way that this project was approved as a manufactured home park with a private golf course, the golf course was tied to the project itself, which differs from a golf course that could theoretically be built next door. So it seems as though it's a different animal from that perspective. I would certainly like to hear about ideas in which the traffic can be mitigated on site, and I am aware of the concerns that were expressed at the last meeting by folks from Broad Hill and Gravelly Hill area. I am wondering if there is, in addition to language that prevents other events going on, are there limitations that the board could place on, say, the number of golf tournaments per season, given the fact that generally when something like a tournament occurs, a golf course is closed. So if that were to occur, the residents would not have use of the course for that particular day. And is that something that we can consider to help prevent events that are not only scale or frequency?
So I think the general, I'll start from the general legal framework that you consider with any conditions, is that there has to be a nexus with the condition that you're asking to be imposed, and it has to be a reasonable burden on the developer when weighed against the potential impact. So with that framework, looking at things such as golf events, you know, it's not being a golfer and not knowing much about how golf course work, you know, I can't really say if there's a nexus between having an event on a golf course and increased traffic. It may be. And then the other consideration is, if you put a condition on or that you're going to hamper this golf course to an excessive degree, you know, though I'm not sure how you'd weigh it out, because, you know, there's a lot of factors that would go into that, but those are the two considerations that you'd consider.
Just thinking about other projects that we have reviewed that have different types of events, and how limiting those events based on impact to the adjacent neighborhood is something that we have done in the past.
I think, Maria, part of the rational nexus that Peter talks about is you have a golf course, and there should be golf course-related activities there. And in staff's motion, we tried to clarify that you can go and golf there, whether you're paying a daily rate to golf 9 holes or 18 holes, or whether you're paying a South Kingstown football team fundraiser where you're paying a fee to the fundraising event, but it's still a round of golf that you are purchasing. So it is still golf orientated versus the Taste of South County that wants to have their event at the new golf course and put up tents that is not necessarily golf-centric. And we tried to clarify in our motion that you have to golf there. You cannot just attend an event there that doesn't have a correlation to the activity of golfing 9 or 18 holes or using the practice facilities. You know, I think we talked about, you know, I couldn't have an anniversary party there with my family and put a tent up on the driving range. That has no correlation to golf. It is an event where I'm renting the driving range as a flat surface to hold a reception. And again, we tried to clarify the language. We can work on maybe another sentence or two within that language if the planning board feels they need that. To really clarify that is the public can go to this facility and purchase a round of golf. The public cannot go to this facility and attend a wedding on any of the golf course proper areas, nor in the prior approvals are they allowed to rent event space within this development to hold a wedding or a function from the outside.
So, more specific language relative to the events would be appreciated. What recourse, if any, do the residents have if they were to have a golf tournament every weekend, say from the season is May to September, at which point it would be closed? Because generally when you have these kinds of things, the golf courses are closed to the public when they have tournaments.
Just to clarify the question a little bit, is this with respect to the private road issue or just traffic more generally?
Traffic. And availability, really, if the course was initially designed for use by the residents in the country club, it may not be as available as they expected. Again, given to the highest degree of use potential.
So, if I'm not answering your question, just let me know. But from the traffic perspective, there's really not much recourse. You know, if you're in a neighborhood where traffic increased because there's a development that has a higher demand on traffic, you know, you can petition your council for improvements to infrastructure, which can handle the traffic better. But you know, there's really not much of a legal right of redress based on increased traffic near your home. If it's a private road, there's certain things you can do. You could potentially bring a nuisance claim, a private nuisance claim, if it is creating if it's a use that's creating a nuisance on the private road. You could potentially, you'd have to clear it with the fire department and the police department, but you know, there's things you can do like gating the road, depending on where it's located, whether that's a feasible option. Individuals that trespass on private property can always be subject to either civil trespass claim, or if they repeatedly do it after warning, they could have a criminal trespass claim. It's difficult to enforce that on a private road since you're not really stopping anyone there. Was there also a question about the availability to the owners of the golf course use?
Yes, the residents, yes.
You know, I'm not, depending on what the legal structure of their ownership interest is, you know, if there's some type of homeowners association, maybe there's some type of right they could assert, but it's not something the town would get involved with. Barring that, again, there wouldn't be much of a recourse.
So some of what you've alluded to relates to sort of private enforcement down the road, but we're being asked to make a decision that we have concerns that it may impact the traffic to a greater degree than it currently is, so.
Right. I think at this point, what the board can do preemptively is conditions to mitigate traffic impacts, signage requirements, potentially traffic flow restrictions on site. If there's infrastructure that would help, that's feasible on the site, that's a possibility. You know, those are the types of things you could consider preemptively.
Thanks.
Maria, just to expand upon that, on the golf side, that I want to say, unlike I don't want to enter new testimony, but unlike a restaurant where you could turn tables faster, your limitations of a golf course are dictated by play, and this was discussed during the public hearing. Because a 9-hole golf course, you're going to have between 9 and 12-minute tee times. You can't do 3-minute tee times because you can't push the golfers through a golf course any quicker than 9 to 12 minutes apart. Because we talk about level of service for traffic, A, B, C, or D. If you go shorter than a 9-minute tee time, you're going to have level of service F, because the golf course is going to back up. So you can only put a through product through the golf course, which is somewhat self-regulating by limitations of having someone on a tee box, someone in the fairway, and someone on a green. So unlike other activities where you can increase volume by making a modification to how you utilize your site, you have some limitations on a golf activity about the number of people you can go through. You can only send 4 people down a fairway roughly every 10 to 12 minutes. And that's all you can do. You can't say, well, and if that relates to, 10 rounds or 6 rounds an hour, someone can't say, well, we're going to send 12 rounds an hour off. That can't happen from a structural standpoint, because the golf course would fail with regards to gridlock, similar to a road. So there's only a certain amount of through product you can push there.
Thoughts? Joe?
So I'm a little confused, and I'm sorry if I'm asking the same question in a different way, but I want to make sure I understand. We are not approving a public golf course. We are not approving a change in use code. We are approving what any future proposals or potential complaints that rise to either staff or to the planning board would be evaluated based on the original use code that was approved for this, as well as the conditions of approval, with the only other exception being that we're allowing the public. We are not changing the use code, and that future proposals would not be evaluated based on a public golf course. Is that true?
And so the only thing you would be changing is the approved plan for this development and basically eliminating the restriction that requires it to be non.
So the original use code and the original conditions of approval all remain applicable. That's what would be the basis for any future evaluation by staff or the planning board, and the only difference is that the public can play. That we're making that exception.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, a good clarification to that, Joe, is they did not apply under the current use category that allows a public golf course. They applied to make a change to the previously approved plan on the public-private play. That's all.
So if this is approved, if the board approves this, should that clarification be put in there that we are not changing the use code, and that they did not apply under this, that the original use code and conditions of approval all remain in effect?
I think it would make sense to put language to that effect.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Susan?
In the, so in the motion, it mentions the words "become members." I don't know if this golf course is the kind where you become members, but I would think that if it is, that would be a good opportunity to tell new members the rules about how to get there and how you're not allowed to pass through local neighborhoods. And so I know the public hearing's closed, so there's no one I can ask, but if it is a become member situation and there's a specific literature given to the new membership packet, I would like to see specific instructions, not suggesting Route 1, but saying you have to go by way of Route 1 and you cannot be sneaking through the back way to get in and out of here, because we all love a shortcut. And then the last condition of approval, number 4, says that all promotional materials will direct visitors to gain access. I would prefer to see that a little stronger language where it also prohibits access by way of private roadways that are to the north. I don't know how to articulate that, but I would like to see it stronger than directing the visitors to go by Route 1. I think that people need to know that that's private roads and you're not allowed to drive back there.
What if they're coming from there?
I think those are the people that are now members that are now allowed to play.
I'm talking about the village right next door, or the people that live on that private road.
But they've always had access to this site. We're talking about people coming down from outside of that neighborhood, cutting through that neighborhood, and that being a problem.
I'm saying the people that live in Wardenspond Village
Yeah,
right now.
yeah,
They can't play golf here.
yes.
No.
Wasn't that part of the deal with that? This
No.
neighborhood and Warden's Village have always had a cooperative
No.
arrangement.
No.
I believe it was just Tuckertown.
Oh, do I have the wrong village? I don't know the lingo of the
I think,
villages down there.
and I can ask
Sorry, wrong village.
Susan, if I may, I'll ask council to weigh in this. As you make conditions, there has to be that, council has already advised you that there has to be this rational nexus. There's also a backside to the conditions you put in, is that the town has to be able to regulate and enforce. And the zoning and code enforcement department, as well as the planning department, does not have the resources to determine where a car is coming from and where a car is going to and what their original destination was or was not. So if you included a condition that prohibited someone from coming in from the north utilizing a private road, and someone did, I don't know how the town enforces that. It may be well-intentioned on the condition side, but literally not practical on the enforcement side.
I think what you could do, and this obviously doesn't go to the full extent of enforcement, but what you could do is require the owner to inform people that use the golf course. And I don't know either whether or not there'd be membership, but either members or just members of the public that show up to golf, that this is the way you should get here. As far as the individual people that go to the golf course, you can't really enforce against them because we don't know who they are, they have no notice of it. It's,
Yes, Jamie's correct in that however well-intentioned any efforts, promotional materials or signage, most people are going to use their GPS or a navigation app to get to the site, which may not be the same as any signage. So I don't think it's something that we can even attempt to enforce.
I did make a note, Madam Chair, to item number 4, that we could change the language to say, all promotional materials and membership materials, i.e. webpage, email, digital media, and golf course literature shall direct. So we're adding that membership. It's just another step in an attempt to do that. I know going to different venues that certain golf courses actually send you information when you book a tee time on what their etiquette is, what you're allowed to do within their facility, and what you're not allowed to do, and what you're allowed to wear, not wear, and where you can or can't use your cell phone. So some of that becomes self-policing.
Is it worthwhile adding either in the findings or, I'm not sure how you would word this for an approval, the fact that change to a public use may require a higher degree of maintenance on the public roads that access the golf course? Is that, I mean, we've stated that, it's a concern. Is it something that is of any benefit?
I mean, you could put it in there. I think the benefit that it could have would just be creating a record. You know, possibly some point in the future, there may be some infrastructure project the town takes on, and, you know, this could be a data point. But beyond that, you know.
And would that be appropriate in the findings rather than in the conditions?
I think it would be more appropriate for the findings, yeah.
Madam Chair, if I can put my transportation hat on of 20 plus years, I don't know how you separate traffic from the golf course, the general traffic, and impacts from the residents. The residents who live there, 300 plus, could all have one car or could all have 2 cars. If they all have 2 cars, there's more impact on the roads than there if they have 1 car. So I don't know how you could determine what and I'll turn to Mark Convoy to weigh in on this also, how you could determine the potential impact of a kind of vehicular traffic on the passenger side, where the roads are designed to take much larger vehicles and the impact from those larger vehicles. But I'll defer to Mark if he can.
I do want to say that, as Peter said, it creates a record. It's just putting it out there, putting people on notice that this may, and again, language may, not will, impact maintenance of these private roads, because that's something that was brought up at the public hearing.
But we don't.
I don't think there's anything more I can add to that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but Mark, are you saying there is potential and impact, or that you can't quantify an impact?
Or not.
Yeah, I can't quantify an impact. There has not been a study stating what type of traffic is going to be going down there and how much, and there's just no data to go on.
I wasn't asking to quantify. That's why the language may impact future maintenance of these private roads. Anyone else? Susan, you had made a suggestion to make the conditions, I think you were talking about condition number 4, to strengthen it to a certain extent or clarify it.
Jamie changed it up a little bit.
Can you
Yeah.
read that, Jamie?
Yeah, just for clarification, item number 4, that all promotional materials and membership materials, i.e. webpage, email, digital media, and golf course literature, shall direct visitors to gain access to and from the facility via Route 1.
Would we add that any other access would be via private roadways and is prohibited? Like, is that a thing?
But there is no ability for town staff to enforce that as a condition. Because again, to Mark's point earlier, and I think Peter made a point, that when someone's driving by, we don't know if they're going, we would literally have to identify the car, follow the car to the golf course, watch them take a golf bag out of the car and golf, and then what would we do if we saw that?
I guess I was hoping more of a deterrent.
But if it becomes a condition, if you could have a neighbor say, you're not enforcing the conditions of your approval, I observed someone drive through my neighborhood and go to the golf course. And that we just, from a practical standpoint, I don't know how we would ever enforce that. No, it's a good point, Susan, but I don't know how we would enforce it.
Are there any other concerns with regard to the conditions? Any changes folks would like to see? Joe?
Just in regard to my previous comment regarding the use code under which anything in the future will be evaluated, I think we can make a modification to condition of approval 1. Perhaps if it says the original use code and all prior conditions associated with the previous approvals shall remain in full force and effect. Specifically, condition 6 shall remain in full effect with the exception that public play shall be allowed. And then the following, then add the use code is not changing for this facility. The use code is not changing for this facility.
Yeah, or as an alternative, Joe, I just added at the end of that sentence on 1, original use category has not changed.
Okay, it would just be that beginning, that original use code and to start off that sentence.
Anything else? Hearing none, would someone like to make a motion as revised?
I'll go ahead and do that. The South Kingstown Planning Board hereby approves the requested amendment of the previously approved conceptual master plan to allow the general public to play and/or become members at the 9-hole golf course and utilize the practice facilities associated with the golf course, i.e. driving range and putting green. Findings of fact A through E. Conditions of approval 1, the original use code and all prior conditions associated with previous approvals shall remain in full force and effect. Specifically, condition number 6 shall remain in full effect, with the exception that public play shall be allowed. 2 and 3, and number 4, all promotional materials and membership materials, i.e. webpage, email, digital media, and golf course routing shall direct visitors to gain access to and from the facility from Route 1.
And what about the findings with the language that, let's see what I wrote. There may be impacts to private roads that will affect future maintenance. Are you okay with that?
Yes, I will add that as F
Yes.
under findings of fact.
We have a motion from Liz. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Peter. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Our next agenda item is a public hearing, Administrative Subdivision, Unified Development Review, George Administrative Subdivision.
So, Madam Chair, as the applicant comes forward, I just want to touch upon the administrative aspects
I
of
was
the...
going to ask for that very thing.
So, this, under the new legislation, would typically just come in to the administrative officer with regards to minor subdivision. However, this application requires dimensional relief with regards to potential non-compliance of lot size within the zone. Therefore, you're wearing a kind of a zoning board of appeals hat. Once you make a determination on relief of that dimensional, then you put your planning board hat back on and can rule on the subdivision. Does anyone have any questions on that?
So that explains why there are two motions.
Correct.
William
evening.
George for the applicant, William and Paula George. So, application for administrative subdivision. William and Paula own 93-1, lot 127 and 116. And they're looking to change the lot lines on the lot 116. They're looking to, if you can see on the map there, it would be there. Actually, that map doesn't really.
So if I can just help out, this is the existing conditions. There are 5 record lots that make up these 2 parcels.
Yes, yeah.
Lot 127, which is also previously known as 164, is standalone
Yeah.
at .12 acres. And there's 4 other record lots, lots 165, 166, 180, and 181.
Yeah.
That
thank you, Jay.
make up lot 160.
Correct. Thank you, Jay. Yeah. So lots 165, well, they're looking to merge 165, 164, 165, and 166 together. And separate that from lot 181 and 180.
While they're looking at the mapping, can you explain how the relief that you propose to have granted relates to the hardship on these particular lots?
I'm sorry. The relief, what are you asking me?
So you're asking for relief based on hardship. Can you explain that?
I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by that. We're simply looking to divide the lots
Right.
here.
Peter?
Yeah.
So the board right now is sitting as both a planning board and a zoning board. The zoning board standards, which you're going to become more familiar with as these type of applications come in, They allow for a variation from the dimensional and other requirements of the zoning ordinance, but you have to make certain findings. The first finding that you have, or the primary finding that you have to make, is you have to find a hardship. The hardship needs to amount to more than a mere inconvenience, and there's certain conditions that hardship then needs to satisfy. The first being that the hardship comes from a unique characteristic of the land or structure to which the variance is being granted. The second, that the hardship wasn't created by the applicant. The third, that the grant of relief to alleviate this hardship won't impair the intent of the zoning ordinance or the comprehensive plan. And actually, that is all of the requirements now that the General Assembly changed the law. So,
Have you had an opportunity to look at the staff comments on this?
No, I haven't, no.
Can we perhaps
Can you share those with
give
us?
him a copy of this? And for clarification from staff, these lots would continue to be non-conforming?
Correct. Lot 27 in its present allotment of 0.12 acres would, in essence, be more compliant, but still non-conforming. And lot 181 and 180, which includes 166 and 65, would become smaller than it presently is, but in all, the net result would still be a non-compliant lot. So,
Question for Peter, since we are now living under this new Unified Development Review, would any decisions made with regard to this type of approval create a precedent that would put the planning board in a less than optimum conditions moving forward for other projects?
well, the precedential value of your decisions sitting at a zoning board is limited because each application is based on the individual hardship presented. So, there are just a whole range of equitable considerations that you take into account in each case, and every piece of property is different. So, one thing, just looking at this, is you have a through lot. You'd be eliminating a through lot with this lot shift. That's a different factor that might not apply to a different application that comes before you.
Thank you. Questions from board members? Joe?
I guess just really to staff. I mean, we got two houses on these lots now. We're not going to be able to create any more additional house lot. This is just strictly changing it so that it's, I guess, the better yards. Right? We're not creating. Are we creating any other opportunity to build here?
No, it's an administrative subdivision, just moving the parcel line to more evenly allocate the land area between the 5 record lots. And while they'll still be substandard, staff feels that it is a better configuration and that it meets the character of the adjacent neighborhood, that it is similar to the other development that's along the street in that neighborhood.
And we're not creating any opportunity for variances or encroachments to neighbors or anything else. They already own the land, right?
Correct.
All right.
Other comments, questions? Good answer, by the way, Jay. That was
Thank you.
helpful.
Did you have a moment to confer about our
I would echo what Jay just said. It's more conforming with the lot sizes of the neighborhood.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Hearing none, would someone like to make a motion to close the public hearing?
Before you do that,
Yes.
I have no problem at all with this.
Microphone, Joe.
I have no problem at all with this. I'm ready to approve it. But I do think that as part of this process, the applicant does have to state what the hardship is so that it goes on record. So before we close it, I'd like to hear what the hardship is. And,
That's why
I mean, I like to say, tell him what it is, but I mean, he needs to say it. It needs to go on
Yeah,
record.
exactly.
Just, Madam Chair, you do have a motion.
Understood, but we don't have a second, so the question is certainly legitimate. I was trying to get you to
Yeah,
state that.
yeah, yeah. And the hardship is the, yeah. But it's not, I don't see how that's a hardship, though.
It is.
I know it's easy to just say what Jay said, but you really should for the record.
Yeah. Okay, all right. I mean, the configuration of the lots is not, lots 181 and 180. Lot 164 and 165 and 166 can utilize 164 can utilize lots 165 and 166, whereas lots 180 and 181 can't really utilize it as much.
And so I'll
Therefore, a better allocation of the land.
Yes.
Susan?
So I'll just ask, so can I assume you're taking down the house that's furthest to the north there and just
No.
replacing it onto the middle of that lot? Like,
No,
what
no,
was
they're
the-
not doing that at all.
Huh.
No. They'd like to build a garage on lot adjacent to the house on lot 164. That's all. To go with the house.
And I was only asking because I'm nosy, not because it
No,
matters.
that's fine.
So we do have a motion to close the public hearing from, was it Peter? Do we have a second? Second from Joe. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all's in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries.
Okay. Thank you.
So, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No?
So we have two motions which begin on page 4. Would someone like to make the first motion?
I'll make that motion.
Microphone, please.
I'll make that motion. The South Kingston Planning Board hereby grants a 9110 square foot lot area variance associated with lot 116 and a 4318 square foot lot area variance associated with lot 127 based on the proposed administrative subdivision requested by George for the George Administration Subdivision Assessor's Plat 93-1, lots 116 and 127 located at 181 Peninsula Road and 45 Ninigret Ave, William E. George and Paula T. George, applicant owner. The granting of said relief is based on the following findings of fact, A through D.
We have a motion from Peter. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Liz. Any further discussion?
Yeah. I think that we should add a finding of fact that the subdivision does not create any additional lots. I only want to put that in to distinguish that from other applicants that may come in front of us where they are taking one lot and dividing it into potentially two building ones.
I'd just like to clarify that this is an administrative subdivision, and by nature, by definition, that's what it is. It does not create any additional lots for development. If it were, otherwise, it would be a minor subdivision or a major subdivision, but this is presented and approved as an administrative subdivision. But I don't think there's any harm in it. I just wanted to just establish that distinction.
Peter and Liz, are you okay with that modification? Sure. Very good. Anything else? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
On the same page, we have motion number 2.
Consideration of the relief granted for minimum lot size associated with the proposed subdivision. The South Kingston Planning Board hereby approves the George Administrative Subdivision to reallocate and reconfigure existing lots of record between the two subject parcels identified as Assessor's Plat 93-1, lots 116 and 127, located at 181 Peninsula Road and 45 Nantucket Ave. William E. George and Paula T. George, applicant owner. This approval is based on the following findings of facts and conditions of approval. Findings of fact, blah, blah, blah. In accordance with the article, I can't see that, 8, section B1 of the subdivision and land development regulations with regarding to waivers, the planning board hereby grants the following waivers. Waiver request, administrative subdivision checklist, section A, items 1 through 23. Do I read that?
Yes,
Jesus.
I would.
The applicant is also asking for a waiver of the checklist required for a property survey. The applicant states that the lots as originally laid out by the 1925 Matunic Point Plat Plan includes dimensions of lots in question. Legal description in 2 new deeds may be relied upon based on the records and prior deeds. In doing so, the planning board finds that
You just say A and B.
A and B, and finding of facts A through E, and conditions of approval 1 through 4.
We have a motion from Peter. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Liz.
Madam
Any fur-
Chair, may I clarify something? So in condition number 2, staff is recommending that the record lots be merged by action of the applicant so that they effectively go away. Currently, there's 5 record lots there that are considered merged by zoning, so those record lots still exist. However, from the town standpoint, they're combined into 2. The provision, the condition in number 2 basically requires the applicant to merge those record lots into 1 lot each and allow those record lots to be extinguished. And I just wanted to know if that was okay with the applicant. I'm not sure that you had read the conditions of approval prior to this evening.
Yeah, I didn't get an opportunity to read this, I'm sorry. Yes, no, they're going to be, they want to merge, the lots would be merged into,
So if you look on the screen, effectively lots 180 and 181, which make up 116, they would go away, and it would just be merged into 116, and that's the lot that would legally exist upon approval of the subdivision.
that's exactly what they're looking to do, yes.
Okay.
So Jay, do you feel that the language needs to be modified under condition number 2 or not?
No, it's explained in there correctly.
As long as you're fine with that.
I just wanted to make sure the applicant was okay with that, since they
Always a
most
good
likely
idea.
have read it.
Yes, that's exactly what they're looking to do, yes.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The board usually takes a 5-minute break, a couple of hours into the meeting, so if everybody's okay with that, we'll be back in 5 minutes.
How long have you owned it for? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And do you maintain all the gardens? Is that you, or is that one of your tenants, or? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I got like 3 really nice apartments in there, 2 that need a little work, but I need something.
I feel like I saw a picture. Did you like list it on, like, I felt like I saw the inside for some reason. I don't know if it was like Zillow. Yeah. Yeah. It looks so, yeah, it looks beautiful.
Where are your apartments, John?
I got Wesley, Johnson.
Jamie, it looks like everybody's getting approvals tonight. Are we just gonna leave with our approval? And you get approval. That's right, that's what I was thinking. In fact, I'm already under your chair. It's like a wedding. Like Oprah. That's great. I love that. Is the 5th agenda item, they're not here? Yeah. Okay. How does, yeah. What is it?
We all set? Our next agenda item is, oh, oh. Our next agenda item is development plan review, change to a previously approved plan, Frank Avenue Industrial Park LLC. There was a correspondence to the planning department from the applicant that they are not yet able to complete the incomplete items or engineering because their engineer has been away. They are requesting to continue this item to our September 24th meeting. So would someone like to make that motion? We have a motion from Peter. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Joe. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Next agenda item is a pre-application development plan review, conceptual pre-application, Paul Massey, Tower Hill Road. As planning board members are aware, the pre-application is not a formal stage of review. It is simply a sharing of information and recommendations. Is there anyone representing the applicant?
Yes, good evening, Madam Chair. Christine Dieter from Hinckley Allen on behalf of Paul Massey Chevrolet South, Inc. With me this evening are Scott Wellington and Michelle Massey from Massey Chevrolet and Chris Duhamel from Dupree Engineering. So as you mentioned, we're here tonight on pre-application review for the parcel at 4087 Tower Hill Road. This is a parcel that you may be familiar with. There have been some proposals related to this property that have come before the town previously. And it's an interesting parcel. It's zoned R80, but it has never conformed to the R80 zoning requirements. Going back to the 1950s, this was used as a gas station up until about 2008. More recently, it's been used for the sale of liquefied gas, for truck and trailer rentals, and most recently for parking home heating oil delivery trucks. In addition to that historic use, this is also a site that has historic environmental contamination on it, dating back to about 2000. There are 2 reported releases with RIDEM, and these related to the underground storage tanks that used to be on site. This is something that's not uncommon when you have underground storage tanks in a gas station of this vintage. But what it does mean is that this property doesn't have a future as a residential use. And so what do you do with it? We think we have a proposal here that will be beneficial to both the town and Massey Chevrolet. And I'll let Mr. Wellington speak in a little bit more detail about it in a minute. But what we're looking to do is put the parcel back to a beneficial use and also provide greater beautification of the property. And what we're proposing is to use it as a lot for new vehicle storage for the Massey dealerships. It can hold about 50 to 60 vehicles. These would be new vehicles, not any sort of dump trucks, storage vehicles, things like that. And it would be essentially a passive use. There wouldn't be any commercial transactions on site. There wouldn't be any customers or members of the public coming to this site. You would have the cars parked there. Periodically, employees would travel to the site, pick up a car, and drive back to the dealership. And as part of the proposal, what we would also suggest is beefing up the landscaping in front of the parcel to shield the operations from view. Now, given the sort of unique history of the parcel that I've described a bit, we would need some relief because we're in some ways trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. So at least at this point, we're here tonight as sort of a first stage in development plan review. We would also need a use variance given the R80 zoning, and I expect there would also be some associated waivers from the development plan regulations relating to some of the parking lot landscaping requirements. So that's why we wanted to come before you this evening and have a bit of discussion about the project. So if I may, I'll just briefly turn it over to Mr. Wellington to...
Before you do that, I just want to ensure that you understand that this is a scenic roadway, and do you understand how important it has been to the town and the effort and time associated with getting this status for the town?
Yes, we are aware of that and understand that importance, and that's why we think that as part of this, there's an opportunity to provide some beautification of this site that would be in line with sort of the scenic highway that the town has worked to get designated there.
And do you understand that DEM is still monitoring this site, and they have not yet said that no other uses can occur, that residential uses cannot occur on this site at this point in time?
That is correct. Yes, it is an open matter with RIDEM. There is not currently an environmental land use restriction on the property. That said, given the nature of the historic contamination on the site, I think it's highly likely that ultimately there will be an environmental land use restriction on the site.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please continue.
Good evening. My name is Scott Wellington from Paul Massey Chevrolet South. The reason why we're requesting this variance is we've outgrown our facility on 399 Main Street. As many of you know that we're busting at the seams over there. And it would also provide the town some relief with the municipal parking as well, because sometimes our customers are utilizing that, because they can't find a parking space on our lot or Main Street. And our intention is to use this property right here to support future growth, okay, and also take off some of the inventory that's on our lot right now.
Can you explain how you would make this space less visible for automobiles than your location further north? I do recall quite a few years ago there was an expansion to the north.
Yep.
And there were trees that were subsequently cut down, which I think the town was not aware that that was going to happen, which is now, there's some minor landscaping, but full view of all the vehicles, which it's understood that's what car dealers want to do. They want their...
We didn't cut any down, we trimmed them up a little bit.
I think that if you look at
And then there was actually
Google Maps, you can go back historically and go back to 2008 and see where the trees were, and I don't believe they are currently there.
There was an accident last summer, too, that somebody mowed down 3 of the trees right on Route 1. So we didn't actually physically take any trees out.
So I think you'll find that there are a lot of concerns relative to
Okay.
the potential for using the site and really having it be completely non-visible. But I will let other board members speak to their concerns and thoughts. Susan? Peter?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to touch on a point that you made earlier. It's somewhat related to the ELUR point, is that if this does come before you seeking unified development review for development plan approval plus the use variance, just because the board isn't used to granting zoning relief, the use variance standard does have a very exacting standard. And what the applicant would have to show to get a use variance is that the subject land, or structure, in this case land, would not yield any beneficial use if it's required to conform to the provisions of the zoning ordinance. So I think you would have to show that you couldn't have a residential use or the other uses that are permitted within the R80 zone, which is a difficult task. The other alternative that they could pursue, which is not a question for the board, is that they could ask the council for a zoning ordinance amendment, but that would be a policy consideration for the council to make.
Thoughts from board members at this point? Joe?
I have a question for Peter. So I get that as far as changing the use, no beneficial. If they show no beneficial use, does that open up all the other uses on an equal footing? Or can we still say, yes, I understand that you have no beneficial use, we want to allow something else, but not necessarily consider all these different uses? Are they on the same footing for our evaluation at that point?
So I think what you'd have to show is that no beneficial use if it's required to conform to the zoning ordinance. So first you'd look at all the uses that are allowed in the R80 zone, either by right or by special use permit, and you'd ask, is this a viable use for this parcel? Once the answer is no, you conclude that this can't be used for any of those uses, or beneficial use is the term, so I guess it can't reasonably use, can't profitably use for any of those uses. Then you could grant a variance. You'd grant it for one specific use with whatever conditions that you impose on it to mitigate that use. And if at any point they wanted to change the use, they'd have to come back to the board and again get approval for that specific use.
So if we determine that there's no beneficial use as far as the R80 and what's allowed in the 80, we could then look at other uses, not necessarily what they're proposing, and say, instead of that, we're not going to allow you for that because there's other uses, not necessarily within the R80, that would be more fitting for that area, more fitting for that scenic highway.
No. If you concluded that all the uses in the R80 are not appropriate for this
Then
property,
everything's opened.
anything they apply for is what once they meet that showing of the hardship, then you would just consider what they're applying for. And you'd consider, does that meet the other standards for granting a variance, along with any conditions that you would want to apply for that use. As far as any other use, they would need to come back and apply at a future point in time if they wanted to get a new use. And at that point, if this turns out to be a viable use, if they wanted to change it into a fast food joint or something like that, at that point you could say, well, you have a viable use on the property, so you have a use variance that's already granted. We're not going to grant you a new use unless they could show that that use that they previously applied for is also not a viable use. Because once you grant the use variance for that one specific use, that becomes a permitted use on that parcel.
And if I could just follow up on that, I think you explained that perfectly well. I think what we're looking to do here, as I described, is have this new vehicle storage lot. Now, obviously, we don't have a complete application before you this evening, but we do believe that given the 6+ decades of this property being used commercially, and given the contamination on site, we think we have a strong showing to make that there is no beneficial use. I understand that a use variance is a tough standard to make. This is a unique parcel where it sort of fits the circumstances that you would be looking for that. But we would be looking for that use variance specifically with respect to the car storage lot for purposes of this dealership, and we would be open to discussing with the board conditions to put around the approval that would limit it to that type of use. We wouldn't be looking, for example, we wouldn't be coming back in a year or two and saying we want a fast food restaurant here, and we're willing to work with the board to make sure that you have comfort around that.
Jamie or Jay, could you explain to us what the current status of that parcel is with regard to zoning enforcement?
A little bit of history on that, but I can have Jay follow up on it. Existing non-conforming gas station that is no longer being utilized, and I'm not aware, and Mr. Parker can correct me, that any other uses other than that original gas station have ever been applied for or permits have been granted for?
Yeah, I'll second what Jamie said. I did reach out to Jamie Gorman with a specific question about if the more recent uses were ever legally permitted through the town, and I don't believe he got back to me on that. So I can't attest to that one way or the other. I would like to share with you a little bit of, so in my prior life, I was an environmental consultant, and I did my fair share of remediation, so I'm very familiar with the process and the regulations. So very quickly, in a situation like this where you have a tanks that leaked for a number of years, X amount of product or contamination in the ground, once it's identified through site investigation work, the tanks would get removed, the soil samples would be taken, and so in a site like this, I'm going to put up this, I actually looked at the remediation regulations for the state. So if you see on the screen, I have benzene highlighted. There's two categories in the Rhode Island remediation regs, one for residential and one for industrial, and you can see the disparity between the two. So for a site like this, let's just facetiously say that the benzene numbers were 20,000. It's above the industrial limit, and the soil needs to come out and the site needs to be remediated because it exceeds that threshold. So there would be soil removal activities conducted to remove the contaminated soil and sampling taken at the same time. The removal of the contaminated soil would effectively stop, generally speaking, when you were below the industrial threshold. So once the analytics for the soil came back below 200, DEM would consider the fact that, no more removal would have to happen. And it would be potentially left with a number of other considerations to allow the site to naturally attenuate. So those compounds would, over time, degrade, fade out. However, they're still above the residential threshold. Therein lies the problem. It's above the residential threshold. It can't necessarily be used for residential uses because of that. However, DEM or most agencies would not require somebody to do an exhaustive, expensive removal where they're chasing and chasing and chasing to get it, to find soil that's below the 2.5 that's on the screen. So in the culmination of a remediation project, one of the last things that DEM would put in place would be an ELUR, in most cases, an environmental land use restriction. And that environmental land use restriction requires that the property not be used for residential purposes because it exceeds the residential threshold. And it also would require that the marginally contaminated soil that's left on site be protected or not be the best measures are taken so that there can't be any direct exposure, or it's difficult for anyone to be exposed to that soil. So they would require that the surface treatment be either covered with 2 feet of clean fill or 1 foot of clean fill with a geofabric membrane, or that the site be paved. Along with that, they would also require a soil management plan that specifies that anytime anyone on the site sticks a shovel in the ground, they follow the management plan, and if they can't comply with the management plan, they have to go back to DEM and say, hey, we're in a situation, we have to do this. So it's a means of making sure that whatever contaminated soil is left is not exposed. Humans aren't exposed to it, and that people just don't go digging in it. So this is one of the rare cases where use variances seem to work perfectly for it, because through the remediation process, they can effectively document that we still exceed residential levels and it can't be used for residential purposes. And I think that's important because we don't see these very often, and it makes the concept of a use variance a lot more practical to apply.
Certainly, the differences between residential and commercial are staggering. And obviously, contaminants do not remain within lot lines. So how does that work?
And, well, I had reached out to DEM to inquire about kind of the status of it, and because I knew it had been kicking around for a while. They confirmed that it was still actively being monitored quarterly. And they couldn't commit to what the outcome was going to be. And it's a little bit further complicated, I believe, because I think there may be some downstream, there may be some migration off-site that they're still trying to wrestle with. But in my experience, having done this, most every site that got a clean bill of health in the end after being remediated was covered by an environmental land use restriction, and there was some type of cap on top of the existing soil.
Susan, go ahead.
So Jay, thank you, that's awesome. Is the pavement that's there now the effective cap? Like, did they remove soil and then repave? Or where on the site was it remediated?
I don't know exactly where it is, but I would surmise that the existing pavement was not part of any remedial action plan.
Jay, I think the tanks were located south of the canopy. If you go back and look at aerials, that's where all the digging was. So I do think they dug out the tanks and repaved where the tanks had been south of the canopy.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know, because when they pave it, they also have to put I think they have to put a 6-inch base down before they pave over it. So I'm sure DEM would want to make sure that it meets their definition of being capped. I don't know. I want to say doubt, but I doubt that they would have capped that area where the tanks were removed before the closure was completed, before the remedial action was actually signed off and complete, but I don't know that answer.
The way it stands, I don't know how much soil disturbance you need to do to, I assume, repave this lot. How much digging would be required, but is taking out this asphalt and preparing it and repaving it, would that be allowed based on the amount of remediation and monitoring there's been on the site?
Yes, it would be allowed, but it would have to be coordinated with DEM and the soil management plan that was written for the site.
Okay.
And it would be conducted, I'm pretty sure it would be conducted by qualified engineers and environmental professionals to make sure that there is no inadvertent exposure while they're working on the site, that they're certified to work in hazardous waste environments and those type of things.
Then I would assume that a paved surface might be the extent of what would be allowed on this site. You can't build a foundation. You're not going to be able to, really turn over that soil. So it's going to need to be a surface use?
Yeah. So in some instances, they would allow for, say, a foundation or something like that, but that would be all in part of the approvals with DEM. So when they dig for the foundation, that material probably most likely will be tested and would have to be disposed of if it exceeds any of the thresholds. And it could be part of the remedial action, the remedial process. It's just got to be considered at the time that it's done. They just can't go in and do it after.
And if I could just add to that, typically where you see that happen is on a commercial site. So for example, if you're putting up an office building, we're not so concerned if there's a level of contamination going under the foundation of the office building, right? So you could, pursuant to the soil management plan, you can excavate and dispose of those soils, and then the building itself serves as part of the cap. You can't do that with a residential property because you still have the other exposed area of, grass or lawn that you can't have contact with.
Yeah, but that's only true once you're certain you've ascertained the extent of the contamination as well. If DEM is still saying they're concerned about possible off-site migration, you're absolutely right. You're not going to want to put a structure or a foundation on this site until you've made a conclusion as to is there off-site migration? Is there more source material underneath this site that may need to be mitigated? So actually, leaving this site vacant with an asphalt cap on it would be the preferred option at this point for this site. I'm going to pile on a little bit to what Jay said because I worked for a decade as DEM's underground storage tank attorney. And I would be screaming if somebody was proposing to do more than this kind of development on this site, because at least from what we've heard from DEM, they're not fully comfortable with the extent of the contamination. And so long as there is a possibility of off-site migration, there is a future possibility that you have to go back into that site and remove more source material.
Madam Chair, for a little bit of time frame, somewhere between 2014 and 2015, it appears the tanks were removed, and later in 2016, you'll see that the area was repaved over. So there was probably a 18 to 24 month period.
Other comments, thoughts, Peter?
I'm on the board too long because I remember when Smithco came to talk through this, and I remember the remediation guys talking about it, how, I don't remember if you guys remember this, but he talked about how they could pick up the soil and make fireballs from the soil because the soil was so contaminated. I can still picture the guy saying it, standing right there, because it was a very amazing image to think about.
Joe?
Just assuming we get past the variance stage, I guess my comment is that being this is a scenic highway, the standard I would be looking for is no view of the vehicles, not a parking lot with some nice vegetation in front, but actually no view of the vehicles. So I know that's kind of a tough standard, but that's the bar I'd be looking for.
Agreed. And simply because the current state of the parcel certainly doesn't contribute to the scenic characteristics of the roadway, doesn't mean that any other option is necessarily, or this one is a good one. I mean, as Joe said, the standard would be very high.
So if you told me this site right now was ugly, you're not going to get an argument from me. Like, it'll be hard to make it worse. So I appreciate that you're trying to do something here. And if we did get to the point of talking about design, if you're not going to have the public using the site and people driving in and out, the way you have it designed now, you've got a little landscape island and then a whole lot of still asphalt going out there, so that when I drive down Route 1, the shoulders of that site have no trees. The driveways are super wide and asphalt, and then you theoretically you'll have a chain link fence. So aside from the little landscape island, that makes me a little sad about how little landscaping there is out front. And I wonder if that can be reduced to one driveway. Like, if you're not having the public in and out like a gas station, and you're having your own staff people pulling cars in and out, it could be narrow enough maybe for emergency vehicles, but otherwise not the much asphalt you have now. I would like to see a whole lot of landscaping out front, and I don't mean green giant arborvitaes, but like some nice natives that will accentuate Route 1 and more dense and more filled in than what you have up by Paul Massey South. But speaking of that, it's bright like looking at the sun at Paul Massey South, even at 4 o'clock in the morning. There's so much light on that site, and I don't know if that's for advertising or that's to protect your inventory, but it is. I've flown over it at night, and I can see the Paul Massey from outer space. Like, it's so bright. And so that I would highly object to is another bright as the sun spot on quiet, dark South Route 1.
Yeah, so we wouldn't object to any sort of landscaping. We want to beautify it as well, okay? And as far as the lighting goes, we wouldn't need as many because we wouldn't have people walking in and out of it. So just basically low security light.
But even now at 4 o'clock in the morning, you're lit up like the sun. Like, maybe that could be toned down a bit, but that's only, okay, that's not what we're here for.
No dark sky compliance there.
No. And I think that right now, that's all I had for comments written down. So thank you.
I mean, I would assume that on-ramp or that becoming the driveway, I mean, DOT is going to be all over how big that has to be. And I'm on the Scenic Highway Board for the state, and they'll spend all the time talking just about that and how big it has to be. They're more concerned about how large it is for safety for coming in and out. So it's just something to think about.
But would it need to be bigger than, say, a driveway to a dentist office or some other kind of small business, as opposed to the gigantic gas station opening that's there now?
You get a bunch of engineers, you see how it goes, but I think they're going to try to just not fault, right?
No, but Madam Chair, if I may to react and follow up to Peter's comment and Susan's comment, I think RIDOT reacts to what the applicant initially sends to them. I think in this case, what you're showing the planning board is grossly insufficient. And I think what the end product will potentially look like is very different than what you've shown to date. And I don't want to use the term embarrassing, but I just said it. To still show a plan to the planning board in a pre-app scenario where you're showing 40-foot wide curb cuts and a little bit of green space around an existing island, maintaining 2 curb cuts with 1 fence where you don't even need the second entrance on the south side, and showing literally no landscaping inside your property line and 10 parking spaces is nothing that staff discussed with the representatives of the Masseys. And it wasn't with you, but with council initially. To Maria's point, what staff said is this needs to be invisible and integrated into the existing landscaping north and south of this site. And I think if you could do that, then it could be considered an upgrade to what's there. And understanding your uses, that you're only utilizing this for storage of parking, that there's no offloading of vehicles at this site. You need a very minimalistic entry into this, almost in the 8 foot in, 8 foot out type of range, and even smaller because it's only a Massey employee driving in and it's only a Massey employee driving out, and it's controlled by a gate. So really in a perfect world, but I don't think DOT will buy into that. It's really a one-way in and one-way out, and no one's ever going to be conflicting with that because it's always one of your employees. So in a perfect world, it's probably an 8 foot entrance, but I don't think DOT will buy into that. So you're probably somewhere in the 14, 16, 18 foot range. But I think a lot of improvements can be made within the state right away. And from my perspective, that initial row of parking also becomes landscaping too, because over time, you never know what may happen within that right of way, but you always are in control of what's internal to the property.
Thanks, Jamie. Comments spot on, and as well as Susan and others, the light pollution, the invisibility factor would be a year-round, so that means not deciduous plantings. And then also some kind of analysis with regard to any degree of pollution that having all these vehicles parked on that site might cause.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up, I think going forward, kind of going back to the contamination component of it, I think I can speak for the town that in any event, the town would want to see the remediation concluded on this and would want to see it effectively cleaned up. I think the biggest hurdle that may present is a timing issue. A timing issue with when Paul Massey wants to effectively use the site compared with when the remediation will conclude with DEM and when the ELUR would be potentially implemented. So I think discussions with DEM and trying to figure out what that looks like and where we're at, because I don't necessarily know that granting a use variance without the ELUR in place is appropriate. And I don't know how long it would take to get to that point where they can close out the site with an ELUR, if that would happen within the time frame that the applicant is looking for. So I think that's a big, some research needs to be done on that and try to get some answers so that everybody has an idea of what's on the table and what the time frames are.
Certainly, yeah. So let me just say briefly, you know, that this is why we're here. So we appreciate the feedback. And I think, you know, what I've heard is we've got to decrease the sizes of the entryways, see if perhaps we can even get it down to 1 rather than the 2. Beef up the landscaping proposal so that essentially you're not seeing what's going on there at any time of year, and minimizing the light pollution that you see there. And certainly we can take that feedback, and when we come back with a full plan set, try and incorporate that in a way that reflects the comments that we've heard here tonight. With respect to the remediation piece in RIDEM, I'll just throw in one additional complicating factor that goes to what Mr. Parker was saying. So, you know, as I said originally, the contamination on this site dates back to, you know, first being discovered around 2000. And so there is a third party that under the applicable deeds and contracts has responsibility, has that liability, and is the party with which RIDEM is working on the site remediation. That party is not Massey Chevrolet. So we are in discussions with that third party to try and move things along, but we don't have control right now, and we don't have visibility because we are not an owner we're not the party that RIDEM's communicating with. So we are somewhat limited in terms of what we are able to push forward with that. So I just wanted to make sure that the board understands that potential wrinkle here.
But you will be somebody who RIDEM will be dealing with if you become involved with the property, because joint and several liability puts you in that chain of liability.
Right. The property is under contract, but obviously there are a number of contingencies that go with that. So this is one of the issues that needs to be worked out.
Anything else from anyone? Assuming you've looked at, or will be looking for other parcels as well for future parking needs?
I don't know the answer to that.
Always, yes.
I figured.
Jamie, I assume that we'd be able to place a restriction on no signage, considering what the proposed use is in the scenic. Is that true?
I think what Peter was advising you earlier is that under your ability to grant a use variance, that use variance can be conditioned. And, one of the conditions could be you have to remove the existing canopy. The applicant may want to keep the canopy because it'd be a great place to put a sign. But if their intent, as they've stated tonight, is solely to alleviate pressure on their existing facility, it's not about visibility, it's about the ability to park a car to alleviate pressure. And in reality, I don't think you want anyone to know that you're putting merchandise there because you quietly want it to exist without drawing attention to it. And I think that's the goal of the planning board, as well as the goal of the stewardship plan for Route 1 that you're undertaking, and you have an old stewardship plan for Route 1, so that uses like this blend seamlessly in and disappear into the existing fabric of the corridor and don't stand out as a lighted ball field in the middle of the night.
So, no signage is what I'd be looking for, no vehicles in view, and the entranceway small, and perhaps landscaping on the entranceway to make it look like a residential entranceway, and then not see what's back there.
Peter, I had a question with respect to the request for a use variance. Would that automatically wipe out any claim to restore any of the prior non-conforming uses? Would it amount to an abandonment of those pre-existing non-conforming uses?
So, yes, and from what I'm familiar with the property, I would imagine that any pre-existing non-conforming uses have already been abandoned, just by discontinuance. But I think if you would affirmatively come and ask for a different use to be permitted and get granted that permission, that would wipe out any prior non-conforming uses. And so that any additional use in the future would need to come back to the board for another use variance.
And again, to the extent there were uncertainty about that, we would be willing to work with the board on conditions around that.
I just wanted to state, and I can only speak for myself, but if you found a use for this land that seems to be a very limited piece of land, and you're able to put up some great landscaping and narrow down that driveway and make it blend into the landscape, that would be, I think, a very big gain for the scenic highway. So I appreciate that effort, that if we can do the landscaping and it could be a use of the land, that's just a great bonus for us, because what's there is certainly as ugly as it is. So I appreciate what you are trying to do on that land.
I would second what Susan said. I don't think there's a million people lining up for this piece of property, so I understand we have what we want to be concerned and secure and make right, but if we don't find someone that's interested, we might be looking at this for another 25 years.
Anything else from anyone? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We need a volunteer for TRC, the date of which is September something.
That would be September 11th, but at this time, I'm not sure we have any applications yet.
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 So we might as well have
We
a
do still need
volunteer and then
one.
potential. So potential easy TRC, anyone? Okay. Susan?
Now you jinxed us. She described it as easy. That's going to backfire.
And Jamie, can you just talk about our upcoming schedule, meetings, any changes, and also a reminder that Thursday night is the informational session for Wakefield Elementary School that I believe will be in this.
Yes. So we have two upcoming public informational meetings. The first is this coming Thursday for the conceptual redevelopment of the Wakefield School. The following Thursday is the conceptual layout and reuse of the Oliver Watson property. Both of those meetings will occur in Town Council. We intend to live stream those and record those meetings so people who can't attend can go back. And then we're also looking at September 19th as a boards and commissions night. We will potentially look at one or two representatives from each board and commission to either speak on behalf or attempt to represent the combined comments from those boards and commissions. After next Thursday's meeting, all three concepts will be out publicly, so there may be an opportunity to put those on an agenda before we meet on the 19th for that boards and commissions, or we will provide concepts to the entire board and ask you to write comments to staff, which then we can give to a representative. Without appointing one, the representative would be the chair of those boards and commissions at this time.
But Jamie, it's a public meeting, right?
It is a public meeting.
So anybody can.
So anybody can attend that boards and commission meeting. We're just not sure, depending on how many people come, how we'll solicit public comment outside of boards and commissions. Also, I don't want to say it's a potential conflict, but we'll use that as the language. You continued 571 Main Street to your workshop in September, actually September 12th. There is a Rhode Island APA educational and social event that evening that potentially conflicts with that. I did reach out to Matt Landry about alternative dates for that public hearing for 571 Main Street, which would be potentially October 3rd, which is a first Thursday in October, and the alternative to that would be October 10th, which is the second Thursday in October. And that would mean that your work session scheduled for the 12th would be canceled in its entirety.
Are folks aware of their availability in October, even though it sounds really far away? The 3rd or the 10th? And if not, you can, okay. How about the 10th for people?
That'd be the second Thursday of the month.
Is that Columbus Day week?
Thursday.
Columbus Day is the 14th. So it would be the Friday, the Thursday before the long weekend.
Well, no, because it was Columbus Day, we're going to be Wednesday. It would be the following week. Columbus Day.
We wouldn't be on a Wednesday.
If it could be on Tuesday, because of Columbus Day.
Or-
The town council.
It's a different week. So tentatively, the 10th? You can check with Robin, who isn't here tonight.
Okay. And we'll confirm with their
Okay.
legal counsel.
Great. And anything else for scheduling coming up other than those meetings? And our normal September schedule?
Normal September schedule. The only meeting that was moving was that September 12th,
Yep.
which was regularly scheduled for a Tuesday, but because of some
Yep.
primary voting.
Oh, primary.
that was kicked to the 12th, which wasn't the norm. And again, that would give you only your regularly scheduled meeting in September,
Which would be the 24th?
24th.
Do we have any idea how it looks?
Well, you cleared a little bit of the slate this evening, so you have Frank Ave that was continued, and that's the primary one. I know you wanted to do 571 on a special night. Your only alternative was potentially to see if council was available on that evening.
If it's a light
If
night
it's a
and we
light
only have
agenda.
Frank Ave, why not?
Instead of having a extra meeting.
Yeah.
There's lots on Columbia also.
Lots on Columbia. Lots on Columbia.
If they're, yeah.
If they're ready, but I mean, we did continue that
Yes, we
to
did.
September
Yeah.
regular.
Good point. Well, let us know, and
Okay, but everybody would be, I know you were,
Fieldstone,
you got another,
Fieldstone is September also.
are they coming back?
Their last continuance was continued to the September regular meeting.
Okay. Okay. If there were a light
If-
agenda
yes, if they're,
and their
yes.
legal counsel was available, your September regularly scheduled meeting would be okay?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds,
One meeting in September, because you would be canceling your work session on the 12th.
thanks, Jamie. Motion to adjourn? Second? All those in favor say aye. Thank you, everyone.